Sirens blared as paramedics restrained a hysterical neighbor. "You can't treat my mother like that," the young woman cried, watching helplessly as her elderly, bedridden mom was rushed to the hospital. The neighbor, red-faced and unapologetic, barked orders at the EMTs. But this was no ordinary dispute. A chilling recording had captured her true colors. The battle lines were drawn. There would be a reckoning. Karen stomped up the driveway, her face twisted in rage. She pounded on the front door, screaming Samantha's name. When the young woman finally opened it, Karen shoved past her into the modest home. "Your mother is a menace. I won't tolerate her making a scene in my neighborhood another day." Karen's spit flew as she gesticulated wildly. Samantha stood, stunned, as the older woman ranted about her elderly, bedridden mother's recent outburst. She was having a medical emergency. The paramedics were trying to help her, Samantha pleaded. "I don't care." She disrupted the peace. "This is my street, and I won't have it." Karen's face had turned beet red. Samantha tried to reason with her, to explain her mother's frail condition, but Karen refused to listen. Instead, she threatened to call the police and have the older woman arrested. When Samantha refused to back down, Karen stormed out, vowing to make their lives a living hell. Samantha slammed the door, her heart pounding. She knew this was far from over. Over the next few days, the harassment escalated. Karen called the city to complain about Samantha's illegally parked car. She filed noise complaints whenever Samantha's mother coughed or moaned in pain. Samantha was summoned to a homeowners association meeting where Karen publicly berated her. "Your mother is a public nuisance," Karen spat. "If you don't get her under control, we'll have no choice but to take legal action." Samantha pleaded for understanding, but the other HOA members, cowed by Karen's aggressive tirades, all nodded in agreement. Samantha left the meeting, tears streaming down her face. She knew she had to do something, but what? That night, as Samantha sat by her mother's bedside, the older woman stirred. "What's wrong, my dear?" she rasped. Samantha explained the situation, her voice trembling. "I don't know what to do, Mom. Karen is determined to make our lives a living hell." Her mother's eyes narrowed. "That woman is a bully. Don't let her intimidate you." She reached out a frail hand and squeezed Samantha's. "We'll get through this together." Samantha nodded, her resolve hardening. The next day, she began documenting every interaction with Karen, recording their conversations and collecting evidence of the harassment. She reached out to local advocacy groups, seeking legal advice and support. But Karen was relentless. She continued to barrage Samantha with calls and complaints, and even threatened to have her mother committed to a nursing home. Samantha felt her world closing in, but she refused to back down. Then, one day, the unthinkable happened. Samantha received a frantic call. Her mother had collapsed, and the paramedics had been called. As she rushed home, her heart pounded with fear and fury. The scene that greeted her was one of pure chaos. Karen stood in the middle of the street, screaming at the EMTs as they tended to Samantha's mother. Samantha pushed past her, horrified to see her mother's pale, lifeless face. "What happened?" she cried, her voice laced with anguish. The paramedics turned to her, their expressions grim. "Your neighbor interfered with our treatment. We had to restrain her to get your mother to the hospital." Samantha's eyes widened as she realized the gravity of the situation. Karen's actions had jeopardized her mother's life. The battle lines had been drawn, and this war was far from over. As the ambulance sped away, Samantha rounded on Karen, her eyes blazing with fury. "What have you done?" she screamed. Karen, her face still flushed with rage, shot back. "I was just trying to protect the neighborhood from your mother's outbursts. She's a menace." Samantha clenched her fists, struggling to control her temper. "She was having a medical emergency, you heartless woman. The paramedics were trying to help her, and you interfered." "I don't care." Karen spat. That woman has been disturbing the peace for too long. I won't stand for it anymore. Samantha felt her blood boil. You're going to pay for this, she growled. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you've done. Karen's eyes narrowed. Go ahead, try. But no one's going to believe you over me. I'm the respected president of the Homeowners Association. Who you think they'll believe? Samantha's heart sank as she realized the truth in Karen's words. The other HOA members had already shown their loyalty to the older woman, and she was a pillar of the community. Samantha knew she was fighting an uphill battle. But she refused to give up. That night, she pored over the recordings and documentation she had collected, determined to build a case against Karen. She reached out to local news outlets, hoping to bring attention to her mother's plight. Days turned into weeks, and Samantha's frustration grew. Despite her efforts, Karen continued to harass her and her mother. The older woman's health was deteriorating, and Samantha was desperate to find a way to protect her. Then, one day, Samantha stumbled upon a crucial piece of evidence. She had been reviewing the recordings again when she noticed something peculiar. In the background of one of the conversations with Karen, she could hear the distinct sound of a child's laughter. Samantha's eyes widened as she realized the implications. Karen had always presented herself as a stern, childless widow, but the recording suggested otherwise. Samantha quickly set to work, digging deeper into Karen's past. What she uncovered was shocking. Karen had been married years ago, but her husband had died in a tragic accident. The couple had a young son, but Karen had sent him to live with his grandparents, claiming she couldn't handle the responsibility. Samantha's heart sank as she realized the toll this must have taken on the child. She could only imagine the pain and abandonment he must have felt growing up without his mother. Armed with this new information, Samantha knew she had to confront Karen. She waited until the next HOA meeting, where the older woman was once again berating her in front of the other members. Karen, I know about your son, Samantha said, her voice trembling. I know how you abandoned him after his father's death. The color drained from Karen's face, and for a moment she was speechless. Then her expression twisted into one of pure rage. How dare you? She screamed, lunging towards Samantha. You have no right to talk about that. The other HOA members looked on, stunned, as the two women engaged in a heated confrontation. Samantha refused to back down, pressing Karen on the details of her son's abandonment. In the end, Karen stormed out of the meeting, her reputation in tatters. Samantha knew that this was only the beginning of the battle, but she felt a sense of triumph. She had finally found a way to get under Karen's skin, and she wasn't about to stop there. In the aftermath of the confrontation at the HOA meeting, Samantha felt a mixture of relief and dread. She knew that exposing Karen's dark secret about her abandoned son had struck a nerve, but she also knew that the older woman was not one to back down easily. Sure enough, the very next day, Samantha received a scathing letter from Karen's lawyer, threatening legal action for defamation and invasion of privacy. Samantha's heart sank as she read the ominous words, realizing that the battle was far from over. Undeterred, Samantha doubled down on her efforts to build a case against Karen. She reached out to local advocacy groups and child welfare organizations, hoping to find someone who could help her navigate the complex legal landscape. It was through these connections that Samantha learned about the existence of a local support group for adult children of neglectful parents. She hesitantly reached out, unsure of what to expect, but the response she received was overwhelming. One by one, the group members shared their own harrowing stories of abandonment and trauma, and Samantha felt a sense of kinship and understanding that she had never experienced before. They listened to her tale with empathy and offered invaluable advice on how to proceed. Armed with this newfound support, Samantha decided to take her case to the media. She reached out to local news outlets, pitching her story as an expose on the hidden realities of HOA abuse and the devastating impact it can have on vulnerable families. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within a matter of days, Samantha's story had gone viral, sparking outrage and a groundswell of support from the community. Suddenly, Karen's reputation as the respected HOA president was in jeopardy, and she found herself on the defensive. In a desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative, Karen launched a smear campaign against Samantha, accusing her of lying and manipulating the media. But Samantha refused to be silenced, countering Karen's accusations with the overwhelming evidence she had collected. As the war of words escalated, the community became increasingly divided. Some rallied behind Karen, while others stood firmly with Samantha and her ailing mother. The tension in the neighborhood reached a fever pitch, and there was a growing sense that something had to give. Then, just when Samantha thought she had finally gained the upper hand, a devastating blow struck. Her mother's health had continued to deteriorate, and she was hospitalized with a severe respiratory infection. Samantha rushed to her bedside, her heart heavy with worry and guilt. As she sat by her mother's bedside, holding her frail hand, Samantha couldn't help but wonder if she had taken on too much. The stress and trauma of the ongoing battle with Karen had clearly taken a toll on her mother's well-being, and Samantha couldn't help but feel responsible. But even in her weakened state, Samantha's mother offered words of encouragement and support. "Don't give up, my dear," she rasped, her eyes filled with a steely determination. "We've come too far to back down now." Samantha nodded, her resolve renewed. She knew that the fight was far from over, but with her mother's unwavering spirit as her guiding light, she was more determined than ever to see it through to the end. As Samantha kept vigil by her mother's bedside, the battle with Karen raged on in the community. The local media had picked up the story, and it had become a source of fierce debate and controversy. Karen, in a desperate attempt to regain control, had reached out to her connections within the city government, using her position as HOA president to exert pressure and influence. She threatened to sue the news outlets that had covered Samantha's story, accusing them of spreading false and defamatory information. But Samantha refused to be intimidated. She had amassed a wealth of evidence, including the damning recordings of her confrontations with Karen, and she was determined to use it to expose the older woman's true colors. Enlisting the help of a tenacious local attorney, Samantha filed a countersuit against Karen, alleging harassment, abuse of power, and a blatant disregard for the well-being of a vulnerable individual. The legal battle was quickly becoming a high-stakes game, with both sides unwilling to back down. Meanwhile, Samantha's mother's condition continued to deteriorate, and the young woman found herself torn between her duty to her ailing parent and her need to fight for justice. The stress and strain were taking a toll, and she could feel her resolve beginning to waver. But then a glimmer of hope emerged. The local news outlets, emboldened by the overwhelming public support for Samantha's story, refused to be cowed by Karen's threats. They doubled down on their coverage, uncovering even more damning evidence of the HOA president's misdeeds. As the media onslaught intensified, Karen found herself increasingly isolated and exposed. Her fellow HOA members, once loyal supporters, began to distance themselves, sensing the tide turning against her. Samantha could sense the shift in the community, and it gave her the strength to push forward. With her mother's condition stabilizing, Samantha redoubled her efforts, working tirelessly with her attorney to build an airtight case against Karen. They pored over the evidence, carefully orchestrating a strategy that would leave no room for doubt or ambiguity. And then, the moment of reckoning arrived. At a special HOA meeting convened to address the growing controversy, Samantha and her attorney took the floor, presenting their case with a level of precision and passion that left the audience spellbound. As they laid out the damning evidence, the room fell silent. Karen, once the unquestioned leader of the community, found herself reduced to a quivering, defensive wreck, her carefully constructed facade crumbling before their eyes. In the end, the HOA members, swayed by the overwhelming evidence and the groundswell of public support, voted unanimously to remove Karen from her position. The disgraced former president was escorted from the building, her cries of protest echoing through the halls. Samantha, her eyes shining with tears of relief and triumph, turned to her mother, who was watching the proceedings from a nearby seat. The two women embraced, knowing that the battle had been won, but the scars would take time to heal. As they left the building, Samantha knew that this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long and arduous, but she was determined to use her newfound platform to advocate for change, to ensure that no other family would have to endure the kind of trauma and abuse that they had faced. In the aftermath of Karen's spectacular downfall, the community was left reeling. What had once been a quiet, well-manicured neighborhood was now a hotbed of controversy and division, with feelings running high on both sides of the debate. For Samantha, the victory was bittersweet. While she was relieved to see Karen stripped of her power and influence, the toll that the entire ordeal had taken on her mother's health was impossible to ignore. The elderly woman had been through so much, and Samantha couldn't help but feel a sense of guilt and responsibility. As her mother continued to recover in the hospital, Samantha found herself the reluctant focus of media attention. Reporters clamored for interviews, eager to document the David and Goliath story that had unfolded in their own backyard. Samantha, always a private person, struggled to navigate the sudden scrutiny, but she knew that this was her chance to make a difference. With the encouragement of her mother and the support of the community advocacy groups she had connected with, Samantha decided to use her newfound platform to shine a light on the darker side of HOA politics. She began speaking out, sharing her story, and calling for greater oversight and accountability within these powerful, often unregulated organizations. The response was overwhelming. Samantha's story had struck a chord with people across the country, and she found herself inundated with messages of support and solidarity. Suddenly, she was no longer just a local figure, but a national symbol of the fight against abuse and injustice. Karen, meanwhile, had retreated from public view, licking her wounds and plotting her next move. Samantha knew that the former HOA president would not go down without a fight, and she braced herself for the inevitable counterattack. Sure enough, it came in the form of a scathing op-ed, published in a local newspaper and quickly picked up by national outlets. In the piece, Karen painted herself as the victim, a well-meaning community leader whose efforts had been unfairly undermined by a vindictive and manipulative young woman. The article was a masterclass in spin and obfuscation, with Karen skillfully distorting the facts and playing on the sympathies of readers. Samantha was outraged, but she refused to be drawn into a war of words. Instead, she doubled down on her efforts to build a coalition of supporters and allies who could help her navigate the treacherous legal landscape. As the battle raged on, Samantha's mother continued to recover, and the two women found strength in each other's resilience. They knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but they were determined to see it through, no matter the cost. And then, just when Samantha thought she couldn't take any more, a surprising development occurred. A former member of the HOA board, who had witnessed Karen's abuses firsthand, came forward with a trove of damning evidence against the disgraced former president. The revelation sent shockwaves through the community, and suddenly, the tide began to turn once again. Karen's carefully crafted narrative started to unravel, and Samantha found herself at the center of a growing movement to hold the HOA system accountable for its failings. As the legal battles continued to unfold, Samantha knew that she was fighting for something bigger than just her own family. She was fighting for the rights of all vulnerable individuals, for the sanctity of community, and for the principles of justice and fairness that had been so egregiously violated. With the stunning revelations from the former HOA board member, Samantha's case against Karen had taken on a new sense of urgency and importance. The public's appetite for the story only grew, and Samantha found herself thrust into the national spotlight, becoming a symbol of the fight against abuse and corruption. As the legal battle intensified, Samantha's mother continued to recover, her health steadily improving with each passing day. The elder woman's resilience and determination only fueled Samantha's own resolve, and she knew that she had to see this fight through to the end. But Karen was not about to go down without a fight. The disgraced former HOA president had hired a team of high-powered attorneys, and they were pulling out all the stops in their efforts to discredit Samantha and her case. The courtroom became a battlefield, with both sides trading blows and accusations. Karen's lawyers seized on any perceived inconsistency or weakness in Samantha's case, painting her as an opportunistic liar who was manipulating the system for her own gain. Samantha, however, remained steadfast, buoyed by the overwhelming evidence and the support of her growing network of allies. With the help of her own legal team, she was able to refute Karen's claims and present a compelling, ironclad case that left the judge and jury with little room for doubt. As the trial wore on, the tension in the community reached a fever pitch. Neighbors who had once been divided now found themselves united in their support for Samantha, recognizing the broader implications of the case and the need for meaningful change within the HOA system. And then, in a dramatic climax, the verdict was announced. Karen, the once untouchable HOA president, was found guilty on multiple counts of harassment, abuse of power, and dereliction of duty. The courtroom erupted in cheers and applause, and Samantha could barely contain her emotions. But even as she savored the victory, Samantha knew that the battle was far from over. Karen's lawyers immediately filed an appeal, and the legal wrangling continued to drag on, sapping Samantha's energy and resources. In the midst of it all, Samantha's mother suffered a serious setback, her condition deteriorating rapidly. Samantha found herself torn between her duty to the legal fight and her need to be by her mother's side. It was during this dark time that Samantha received an unexpected visit from a representative of a national advocacy organization. The group had been following her case closely, and they were impressed by her tenacity and courage. They offered her a lifeline, promising to provide the resources and support she needed to continue the fight. Buoyed by this newfound partnership, Samantha redoubled her efforts, throwing herself into the legal battle with a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that the stakes were higher than ever, not just for her own family, but for countless others who had suffered under the tyranny of abusive HOA regimes. As the case dragged on, Samantha's mother's health continued to fluctuate, but the elder woman never wavered in her support and encouragement. "You're doing the right thing, my dear," she would whisper, her voice weak, but her gaze unwavering. "Keep fighting, for all of us." Samantha knew that her mother was right. This was a fight that went far beyond their own family's struggle. It was a fight for justice, for accountability, and for the fundamental rights of every individual to live in peace and dignity, free from the oppressive grip of those who would seek to abuse their power. With the National Advocacy Organization firmly in her corner, Samantha felt a renewed sense of determination and purpose. The legal battle against Karen had become a high-stakes war of attrition, but she refused to back down. As the case dragged on, the media attention only intensified. Samantha's fight had become a rallying cry for homeowners across the country, who saw in her story a reflection of their own struggles with overbearing and unaccountable HOA regimes. Reporters and activists flocked to the courthouse, chronicling every twist and turn of the legal proceedings. Samantha found herself at the center of a growing movement, her face and her story becoming synonymous with the fight for community rights and individual freedoms. But even as she basked in the spotlight, Samantha's heart remained heavy with worry for her mother's health. The elder woman's condition had continued to fluctuate, and Samantha knew that the stress of the ongoing legal battle was taking a toll. Still, Samantha refused to let her mother's fragility deter her. If anything, it only fueled her resolve to see the fight through to the end. She knew that the ultimate victory would not just be a personal one, but a triumph for her mother and for all the vulnerable individuals who had suffered under the weight of abusive HOA policies. As the trial wore on, the evidence against Karen only continued to mount. Witness after witness took the stand, sharing harrowing tales of the former HOA president's callous disregard for the well-being of her neighbors. The jury listened, transfixed, as the full scope of Karen's abuse of power was laid bare. In the end, The verdict was unequivocal. Karen was found guilty on all counts, her reputation and legacy irrevocably shattered. Samantha watched, tears streaming down her face, as the former HOA president was led away in handcuffs, her cries of protest echoing through the halls of the courthouse. The victorious young woman rushed to her mother's bedside, embracing the frail but triumphant woman. "We did it, Mom," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We won." But even as they celebrated the hard-fought victory, Samantha knew that the real work was just beginning. With Karen's conviction, the spotlight had shifted to the broader issue of HOA reform, and Samantha found herself at the forefront of a growing movement to hold these powerful organizations accountable. She began speaking out, using her platform to advocate for greater transparency, oversight, and protections for homeowners. Samantha knew that her fight had implications far beyond her own community, and she was determined to use her newfound influence to drive meaningful change. As the dust settled, Samantha's mother continued to recover, her health slowly but steadily improving. The elder woman beamed with pride, her eyes shining with joy as she watched her daughter take on the mantle of community advocate. "I always knew you had it in you, my dear," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've always been a fighter, and now the whole world knows it." Samantha smiled, squeezing her mother's hand gently. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom. This victory is as much yours as it is mine." The two women sat in companionable silence, basking in the knowledge that they had weathered the storm and emerged victorious. But Samantha knew that the journey was far from over, and she was ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. In the aftermath of Karen's conviction, Samantha found herself thrust into the national spotlight as a symbol of the fight against HOA abuse and injustice. The advocacy organization that had supported her during the trial began to mobilize a nationwide campaign, leveraging Samantha's story to raise awareness and drive legislative change. Samantha had never imagined that her personal battle would have such far-reaching implications, but as she traveled the country, sharing her experiences and lending her voice to the cause, she realized the true magnitude of what she had accomplished. From coast to coast, homeowners shared their own harrowing tales of HOA overreach and community-level tyranny. Samantha listened, her heart breaking with each story, but also filled with a deep sense of purpose. She knew that her fight had opened the door for others to step forward and demand accountability. As the campaign gained momentum, Samantha's mother continued to recover, her health steadily improving with each passing day. The elder woman beamed with pride as she watched her daughter become a beacon of hope for so many, and Samantha drew strength from her mother's unwavering support. Together, they worked tirelessly, speaking at town halls, testifying before state legislatures, and even taking their message to the halls of Congress. Samantha's message was simple, yet powerful. No one should have to endure the kind of abuse and harassment that she and her mother had suffered at the hands of an unaccountable HOA. The pushback from the HOA industry was fierce, with powerful lobbyists and deep-pocketed special interests attempting to undermine the campaign at every turn. But Samantha refused to be silenced, her resolve only growing stronger with each obstacle she faced. And then, in a moment of triumph, the first round of HOA reform legislation was signed into law, ushering in a new era of transparency, oversight, and homeowner protections. Samantha stood by as the governor of the state where her battle had begun, and his signature, tears of joy streaming down her face. "This is for you, Mom," she whispered, knowing that her mother's unwavering strength and resilience had been the driving force behind it all. As the news of the landmark legislation spread, Samantha found herself the subject of even greater media attention. Reporters and news crews clamored to tell her story, to capture the triumph of a young woman who had taken on a powerful system and emerged victorious. But Samantha knew that the fight was far from over. The HOA industry was already regrouping, plotting its next move to undermine the new laws and maintain its grip on communities across the country. And so, with renewed determination, she continued to fight, lending her voice to the growing chorus of homeowners who refused to be silenced. In the end, Samantha's story became a testament to the power of perseverance, the strength of community, and the transformative potential of a single individual's courage. From the depths of a personal battle against a tyrannical neighbor, she had risen to become a national leader in the fight for housing justice, inspiring others to stand up and demand the dignity and respect they deserved. As she stood by her mother's side, basking in the glow of their hard-won victory, Samantha knew that the journey was far from over. But with her mother's unwavering support and the collective strength of a nation behind her, she was ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead.